Amber Creek, Texas, 1882. Grace Sutter had brought food to grieving neighbors a dozen times before, and she thought she understood exactly what the visit required. A covered dish, a few kind words, a quick exit that let a person grieve in private, rather than in front of company. She had not expected, walking up onto that porch with a covered dish and nothing more complicated in mind, to be asked to sit down. Nathaniel Bishop had pulled the second rocking chair over without quite seeming to decide to do it, worn into habit long before either of them arrived at this Thursday, and gestured for her to take it while he settled onto the porch step beside her, dark curling hair falling loose beneath his hat, a short beard he hadn't bothered trimming in a while, a faded kerchief loose around his neck. They talked for a while about nothing important. The drought, the price of beef, a fence line that needed mending on the east side of his spread. The kind of small, unremarkable talk that fills a space without demanding anything of it. Grace held the covered dish steady in her lap, still warm through the cloth, blue calico settling around her knees, and found herself against every instinct that usually got her in and out of these visits quickly, in no hurry at all to leave. Then Nathaniel looked at the chair beneath her, and something shifted in his face. "My wife used to sit where you're sitting," he said quietly. Grace went very still, uncertain whether she'd just been offered a kindness or trespassed on a grief that wasn't hers to sit inside of. Grace Sutter had joined the Ladies' Aid Society meal rotation the spring after her own father died, when 3 women from the church had shown up at her door with covered dishes and quiet company for 2 weeks running, asking nothing of her except that she eat. She'd been 19 then, suddenly alone in the house her father had built, and those 2 weeks of unasked-for kindness had taught her something she'd carried ever since. Grief handled alone curdled into something harder than grief handled with company, even quiet, unremarkable company that didn't try to fix anything. There was no hospital within 15 miles of Amber Creek, and nothing resembling formal relief for a family that lost its provider. Just the church and whatever the town's own families decided to do for each other. The meal rotation wasn't charity exactly. It was what stood in a town that size, for everything a larger city might have built to catch people when they fell. Grace had learned that lesson at 19 and never forgotten it, and had spent the 11 years since paying it forward in whatever quiet way the rotation allowed. She was 30 now, unmarried by choice more than circumstance. She'd had 2 proposals in her 20s and turned down both, unable to explain to either man or fully to herself why neither offer had felt like anything worth saying yes to. She had taken her turn on the rotation for widowers first, every year since her father's death, the ones the other women quietly avoided, uncomfortable with a grieving man's silence in a way they weren't with a grieving woman's tears. She told herself it was simply that she remembered what the silence had felt like from the inside. She didn't examine too closely why she kept volunteering for the same kind of men, year after year, or what it said about her that tending to somebody else's grief had become the one thing she reliably knew how to do well. Nathaniel Bishop had been on nobody's rotation for the better part of a year, and that spring, with the screwworm already reported on 2 neighboring spreads, Mrs. Dunn had a feeling the Bishop place would need more than supper before the season was through. Nathaniel Bishop was 34 and had built the Bishop spread from 160 acres of homestead claim into one of the better cattle operations in the county, back before grief had made the work feel like it belonged to a different man's life entirely. He'd married Rebecca in 1878 in the same church where her funeral was held 2 years later, and the 2 winters since had passed in a version of living that mostly involved doing the ranch chores that couldn't wait and letting everything else go quiet. The kitchen went unused most evenings. The garden Rebecca had kept went to weeds within a season. He ate standing at the counter more often than not, because sitting at a table built for two felt like a question he didn't have an answer to. The screwworm had cost him a dozen head the previous summer, and reports were already coming in of new cases on the Hendricks and Cole spreads that spring. An infestation that spread fast in warm weather, larvae working into any open wound on a living animal until a rancher caught it in time or lost the animal outright. Nathaniel knew the signs. He'd simply stopped checking his herd closely enough to catch them early. A man stops mending a fence eventually once he's decided the field behind it doesn't matter anymore. He knew what the town said about him, that he was too settled in his grief to be worth visiting, that a man who wanted company would have sought it out himself. He didn't entirely disagree with the assessment. When Grace Sutter's wagon came up the drive that Thursday in April, his first instinct had been to send her away with a polite excuse. His second, watching her climb down with a covered dish held carefully in both hands, blonde hair coiled at the back of her neck, was the plain fact that he hadn't had company on that porch in longer than he wanted to admit, and some small, stubborn part of him wasn't ready to turn it away. He hadn't meant to say anything about the chair at all. It had simply come out, watching her settle into it with the same unconscious ease Rebecca once had. The strange vertigo of a room rearranging itself around a memory that had gone quiet for a long while. A feeling like a door opening onto a room he deliberately stopped entering. "I'm sorry," Grace said immediately, half rising. "I can sit somewhere else." "No," Nathaniel said, and meant it. "Stay." "It's not." He stopped, searching for the shape of the sentence, hands turning over each other in his lap. "It's not a bad thing, seeing somebody sitting there again. I think I'd forgotten what the chair was for." "What was it for?" Grace asked, giving him room to say as much or as little as he wanted. "Rebecca's father built it as a wedding gift," he said. "Spent a whole winter on it, out in his own barn. Wouldn't let anybody see it till it was finished. She sat in it most evenings after supper, mending or just watching the light go down over the west pasture. I couldn't bring myself to move it inside after she passed, and I couldn't quite make myself sit in it either. 2 winters now, rain and sun on it, and I still couldn't decide whether leaving it out here was respect or just cowardice wearing a nicer word." Grace didn't offer the reassurance she suspected he'd been given 100 times already, that Rebecca would have wanted him happy, that time healed everything, the well-meaning phrases that meant nothing to a man still doing the daily arithmetic of missing someone. She simply nodded and let the silence sit between them without trying to fill it, which she understood, watching his shoulders ease, was its own kind of answer. Sometimes the kindest thing a person could offer was the absence of an opinion about how someone else's grief ought to look. She came back the following Thursday, though the rotation didn't require it for another 3 weeks. "Mrs. Dunn didn't send me again yet," she said. "I brought the dish back." Seemed a fair excuse. "Fair enough," he said, and pulled the second chair over again without being asked, the gesture already becoming something close to ritual between them, comfortable in a way neither of them had bothered naming yet, or perhaps simply hadn't found the nerve to. Over the following weeks, a rhythm built itself. Thursday suppers on the porch, conversation moving slowly from cattle prices into talk that actually meant something. He told her about the apple orchard he'd meant to plant the spring Rebecca died and never had the heart to start. She told him about running a household alone at 19, how a person could be surrounded by a whole town and still feel like nobody was actually looking at them. Neither of them named what was building between them, though both noticed, more than once, how quickly the weeks seemed to pass between one Thursday and the next. Nathaniel started checking his herd properly again that month, walking the fence lines at dawn the way he used to, though he still hadn't caught every animal the screwworm had already found. He didn't yet know how much that would cost him before the month was out. This story's already found its way to places I never imagined when I sat down to write it. Brazil, Nigeria, India, the Philippines, corners of the world I'm only starting to learn the names of. If Grace and Nathaniel are keeping you good company tonight, a like helps more than you know. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment. Now, the screwworm hasn't finished with the bishop herd yet, and Grace is about to find out exactly what kind of woman she is when the gentle version of helping isn't enough. The hired hand found the steer on a Thursday morning, down in the brush along the creek, a deep gash in its flank, crawling with larvae, and half the animal's strength already gone to fighting the infection. Nathaniel was saddled and gone before Grace had even set the covered dish down, and she went after him without asking whether she should, because there wasn't time to ask, and because some part of her had stopped waiting for permission to be useful the moment she saw his face go pale under the sunburn. The steer was in worse shape up close, thrashing, terrified, the kind of dangerous a pain-crazed animal becomes to anyone trying to help it. Nathaniel needed a second set of hands to hold the beast steady, while he cleaned the wound and packed it with the tar-based dressing that kept the flies from laying more eggs in the open flesh. And there was nobody else close enough to call, his hired man already 3 miles off checking the herd on the North Range. "Hold here," he said, and Grace did, bracing her whole weight against a half-ton of frightened animal. One wrong movement away from a kick that could break something in her. The steer heaved once, hard enough to nearly throw her off her feet and drag her a full yard through the mud. And she held anyway, arms shaking, boots sliding in the wet ground, until Nathaniel had the wound packed and the worst of the danger passed. They found 2 more animals the forenoon, and a 4th by late afternoon, each one requiring the same grim, dangerous work. Grace holding, Nathaniel cutting away the worst of the dead tissue and packing the wound. Both of them working in a silence that had nothing to do with awkwardness and everything to do with concentration. By the 3rd animal, her hands had stopped shaking from fear and started simply doing the work, the way any repeated task eventually stops asking permission from the nerves. They worked through the 4th before the light gave out, and by the time they finished, Grace's dress was ruined past saving, her hands raw and blistered, mud dried stiff along her hem, and Nathaniel Bishop was looking at her like a man who had just badly underestimated somebody. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," Grace said, wiping her hands on a rag he handed her. "Wasn't going to stand there holding a covered dish while you lost half your herd to something I could help fix." He looked at her a long moment in the fading light. "Most women I know would have stayed on the porch," he said. "Most women you know weren't raised by a father who taught them animals don't wait for anybody's comfort before they need help," Grace said. "I've held down worse than a steer. Fear's not much use to anybody once the work's already started." Mrs. Almira Dunn had been Rebecca Bishop's closest friend for 15 years before her death. A fact Grace hadn't fully understood until the older woman cornered her outside the mercantile the following week, her voice sharper than Grace had ever heard it. "You're not on his assignment anymore," Mrs. Dunn said. "I know exactly how many hours you've spent out there, Grace, and it's more than any rotation calls for. Word travels fast in a town this size, and none of it's flattering." "I know," Grace said. "Rebecca was like a daughter to me," Mrs. Dunn said. And for the first time, Grace heard something underneath the disapproval that wasn't simple propriety at all. Something closer to grief, still raw enough to flinch at the sight of somebody else sitting in that chair. "I watched that girl die in a bed I helped make up for her wedding night. I sat with her the whole last week, and I've had 2 years to grieve her proper. And now I watch you out there every Thursday, like you're auditioning to replace her. And I don't know what to do with the way that sits in my chest." "I'm not trying to replace her," Grace said, quieter now. understanding for the first time what she was actually up against. Not a woman worried about propriety, but a woman still mourning a girl she'd loved like her own. "Maybe not," Mrs. Dunn said, some of the sharpness draining out of her voice. "But half this town already thinks you're circling a widower's land, Brace, whatever your intentions really are. Everett Doyle's a decent man who'd marry you plainly, without anybody whispering about what you're really after. I'd rather see you settled and respected than out there mending fences and gossiped about for it." Grace said nothing to that in the street. But driving home, she knew the choice in front of her wasn't only about her own heart anymore. It was about what the whole town would decide to believe about her, regardless of what was actually true. And about a woman still grieving a girl she'd loved, watching that grief play out in a stranger's presence, week after week. He heard about Everett Doyle's growing interest from his own hired hand, who'd heard it from half the county by the time it reached him, and spent that Thursday working up the nerve to say something he'd been circling for weeks, turning it over in his head all through the morning chores, until the words felt worn smooth enough to actually say out loud. "Doyle's a decent man," he said, once Grace had settled into the chair. "Wouldn't get you talked about the way I have. Wouldn't ask you to sit on a dead woman's porch, listening to a man who still can't say his wife's name without his voice doing something he doesn't much like." "You just said her name," Brace pointed out. "Twice." He looked at her, caught. "I'm not here because I feel sorry for you, Nathaniel," Grace said. "I came the first time because that's what the rotation does. I kept coming because I wanted to. Those aren't the same reason." "I'm afraid," he said, the admission costing him something visible, "that wanting you here means I'm ready to let go of her. Some mornings, I still reach for her side of the bed before I remember." "I'm not asking you to let go of her," Grace said. "I'm asking you to let me sit here too." She paused and admitted something she hadn't said out loud to anyone before, not even to herself in so many words. "I've spent 11 years taking care of grieving men because it's the one thing I know how to do well. I need to know this isn't just me doing that again. I need to know you actually want me, not just somebody willing to sit with your sadness." "I do," he said, without hesitation. "Both things can be true. You being good at this and me wanting you specifically. I don't see why one has to cancel out the other." He built the second rocking chair himself that week, using scraps of the same oak Rebecca's father had used for the first one. He'd sat with Grace's question through several sleepless nights before the answer came clear. A porch could hold more than one chair, without either of them meaning the other wasn't real. He set it beside Rebecca's the following Thursday, close enough that the two chairs nearly touched, the fresh-cut wood still lighter than the weathered one beside it. Grace looked at it a long moment, her fingers resting on the still rough armrest. "It needs another evening or two of sanding," she said. "I know," he said. Wasn't in any hurry to finish it. Kept finding reasons to keep at it a little longer. He looked at her directly. "Same reason I keep finding reasons for you to come back on days that aren't Thursday." Everett Doyle proposed the following week at the Mercantile, in front of enough witnesses that half of Amber Creek had an opinion on Grace's answer before she'd worked it out herself. He was kind about it, gentle even, producing a small ring he'd clearly been carrying for some time, waiting for the right courage to appear, and made no mention of the rumors, though Grace understood, watching his careful, deliberate proposal in public, exactly what it was meant to settle once and for all, in front of enough of the town that no one could later claim she hadn't been given a proper, respectable choice. She told him she needed time. He took it graciously. A genuinely decent man rarely takes anything otherwise, and left her standing in the Mercantile with half the county's eyes on her. Word of the proposal reached the whole county within a day, and with it came the exact talk Mrs. Dunn had warned her about. That Grace Sutter had been offered a respectable match and was hesitating for a widower with a struggling herd and a dead wife's chair still on his porch. That she must be either foolish or after something Everett Doyle would never have offered a woman with proper intentions. Grace sat with that for 2 days before she understood the real question underneath it wasn't about Nathaniel at all. It was whether she was willing to be talked about for wanting something instead of settling for something safe. Whether 11 years of quietly taking care of other people's grief had left her any practice at claiming something for herself. Reputation be damned. She went to the ranch on a Tuesday, not a Thursday, and found Nathaniel mending the fence he'd once let go for a year. "Everett Doyle asked me to marry him," she said. "The whole town's decided I should say yes, for my own good." Nathaniel set down the wire cutter slowly. "What do you want?" "I'm done asking what's sensible," Grace said. "I'm asking what's mine." "I've been afraid of exactly one thing since Rebecca died," Nathaniel said, "and it isn't losing her memory. It's that I'd let this whole place go quiet and call that loyalty, instead of admitting it was fear wearing a decent excuse. It's easier to tell people you're honoring a memory than to admit you're scared of being hurt again." He crossed the distance between them, boots loud on the packed dirt of the yard. "I built you a chair from the same wood as hers because I wanted you specifically, not company, not a replacement. I checked my herd again because of you. I held on to this ranch through the screwworm because some part of me started caring what this place looked like again, the week you first climbed down from that wagon, with a covered dish and more patience than I deserved." "That's not nothing," Grace said. "It's everything I've got left to offer," he said. "And I don't much care what Mrs. Dunn or the whole county decides to say about it. I'd rather be talked about with you than left alone and respectable. I'm not going to pretend I've got all of it figured out. Some days, I probably never will. But I'd rather figure the rest out with you sitting beside me than keep doing it alone and calling it strength." She looked at this man with his mended fence and his rough sanded chair. Everett Doyle had never once had to say anything that hard out loud, in public or otherwise. That was the whole difference right there. "Yes," she said. They married that October, in the same church where Rebecca's funeral had been held. Grace never asked him to move Rebecca's chair. It stayed exactly where it had always sat, and some evenings Nathaniel would sit in it alone a while before joining her in the one he'd built. 5 minutes with her memory before returning to the life he was building since. Grace never once made him feel strange for it. She'd bring her mending out to the porch those evenings and wait, unhurried, until he was ready to move to the chair beside her. Mrs. Dunn showed up at the wedding with a covered dish of her own, delivered without comment, which Grace understood as an apology translated into the only language the woman had ever really spoken fluently. The ranch recovered within 2 years, the herd rebuilt, the screwworm losses long since made up, the orchard finally planted on the east side, where Nathaniel had always meant to put it. Grace kept the kitchen garden going every season after that, and made sure Rebecca's name came up naturally now and then at the supper table. Not a wound to step around, but a fact of the house's history, spoken plainly. On quiet evenings, 2 chairs of different wood sat close enough to touch, watching the light go down over the west pasture. And the porch, after 4 long years, finally sounded like a home again, instead of a museum to one. I keep thinking about Nathaniel sanding that second chair a little slower than he needed to, finding reasons to keep at it another evening. That's the part that gets me. Not the speech at the fence, but a man taking his time on something rough, because some part of him wasn't ready to admit how much he wanted it finished. There's something honest in that kind of slowness, in a person who needs a little extra time before they can say out loud what they've already decided in their hands. And I think about Grace, 11 years into being the woman who takes care of everyone else's grief, finally asking out loud what she actually wanted for herself. Reputation be damned. Everett Doyle never once had to say anything that hard out loud, in public or otherwise. That was the whole difference, right there. And I think it's usually the whole difference, in the end, between the safe choice and the true one. Thank you, truly, for riding with me today. Until next time, friend, keep riding.